Hey, welcome back to What Do You Actually Do? On today's episode, we have Mason, who works as a full stack engineer at NRG here in Houston, Texas. Mason, what do you actually do?
My name is Mason, and I'm a full stack software engineer. For coding, I went to kind of like an alternative school. It was called Thinkful, which is like a boot camp, and that one was like around 6 months to complete. I would say the boot camp prepared me decently well. It gave me kind of an expectation of what to do. And so at my boot camp, I did learn the front end, I did learn the back end, but I would say that you're gonna have to self-teach yourself a lot or to get mentorship from seniors in that company. I would say that at school they can only teach you the basics, but after you're done with school, as a software engineer, I would argue that you would have to almost learn every day. But the great news is that there's Google. And so pretty much every day I do Google. It's not possible for you to learn or to remember everything or every single, syntax or every single word. And so a lot of it is also like copying and pasting. And that's the great thing about Google and being a software engineer is that you don't have to memorize everything. You have to understand it enough to know what you have to do and what you need to put in the Google search engine to know what you're looking for. But I would say school, at least Thinkful, did a pretty good job of preparing me for that. Right now I work for NRG. So NRG is an electricity company. And within that electricity company, there's a lot of like child electricity companies. So things like Reliant, Discount Power, Direct Energy, and that's where I currently work right now. There's something called a front-end engineer, and what that means is you're essentially building out the website. So you see what the website looks like. And then there's another engineer called the Backend engineer. When I think about backend or databases, I think of, imagine Facebook. They have information, things like the users, the profile images, first name, last name. So just anything that deals with data that gets stored in a database is the backend. Now, as a full stack engineer, you pretty much deal with both. So you deal with building out what the website looks like, making sure it looks pretty, and then you deal with the backend, which allows information to be stored. My typical day is that I'm a part of the special projects team. So whenever a business is like, hey, I want you to build this app, we're the team to do it. So something I built recently was an app called Door to Door. And what that really entails is that we have electricity agents that knock on people's doors. They try to sell them electricity to the homeowners. So what this business wanted was they wanted a web app that allows those agents to record how their interactions went, their addresses, and whatever notes that they want to leave behind. And they're able to store it on essentially a website. So that's one part of my job as I build just new apps. And then the second part of my job is I work with the analytics team. So I build things like analytics apps to make their lives easier. I do A/B testing. Then the third part is I work with Reliant's marketing team. So I build out different web pages. In terms of what technology I use for the backend, two technologies. The technology itself doesn't really matter. You kind of just use whatever your company uses. And so the one that I use for work is mostly PHP. So that's the one that sends the data to the database. The other one that I use just for fun, because I enjoy it more, is Node, which is like JavaScript based. The actual database I use is MySQL, and that's where the actual data is being stored. Yeah, I would say that full stack engineers are different everywhere, and it is very dependent on the field. So for example, like I work with electricity, so I had to go and learn a lot of just background on electricity and just a lot of the regulations, the rules, and how it kind of works. But if I were to be a full stack engineer, at, let's just say, like a medical company, I would have to learn about probably a lot of new medical words and acronyms, and then probably I would have to learn about the different regulations, what I can do, what I cannot do. And I would say the way that you probably speak probably has to change, just because each field has a lot of different words. And then you probably have to do a lot of different types of brainstorming to come up with a product, or maybe to work with doctors or to work with people in the electrical fields. In terms of the work itself, the technology, I would say it's probably really similar. I mean, you'll still be building websites on the front end and then on the back end storing databases. I would say the one big difference might be the hardware side of things, because what I do is I only build websites, but it doesn't have to interact with like real life stuff. But if I was going to build something for a drone, my knowledge would be completely different. Or if I was building, I don't know, like a rocket ship or something, like my knowledge would be completely different. Or doing things like AI with like self-driving cars, that would be completely different too. So software can be anything. It could be from a simple website to simple desktop, or even something in real life like building a drone and making sure it flies correctly. In terms of what I have to learn on the job that was not taught in school, I would say communication is a really big thing, because you're spending a lot of time communicating with designers, with product owners, with other engineers, and just learning how to like write an email. It sounds very simple, but I do believe it's something you have to learn and continually grow at, and you have to talk to seniors to make sure that your emails are formatted correctly, make sure it makes sense. You know, as software engineers, we have a lot of big, fancy words, but you have to make sure that people that know nothing about software engineering can still understand you. I would say the second thing is you're always refining your skills to kind of problem solve. You do learn problem solving in school, but you always have to think about how you're problem solving before building out the product. And even at work, you're always learning new technologies because tech grows so fast. It differently to be an efficient job finder. And so one of the things that my Bootcamp Thinkful gave me was kind of this Excel worksheet, but it was like very like organized. And so you would have to put in things like the date that you applied for a job, the company, the email, their phone number, how the interviews went. So it was a very organized like process of just putting in data of like when you interviewed and how that interview went. I did a lot of it through probably LinkedIn. Was probably my most common one online. In person, it was just kind of going to like different job fairs and different things like that. It took me about, after completing the bootcamp, probably around 4 months before I found the job. The technical interviews are definitely challenging. I would say that I've experienced two types. One I would call like data structures and algorithms. And those are just really challenging because they're kind of like puzzles. So they're kind of puzzles that are really complicated, and you just have to go and solve it. And then the second type of interviews I've encountered are kind of like realistic issues that you would solve in an everyday, I guess, engineering company basis. So there are things like building out the front end, building out the back end, and just making sure it works. So those are the two different interviews I've encountered. But the more data structure and algorithms interviews they're very challenging, and you would have to study that. It's almost like studying for kind of like a different field, because those are things you don't do on a daily basis.
Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe and like for more.